Yeah. So just getting the earpods set up.
Cool. Yeah, we're doing a little bit of a different format today. We're actually having a company on site, so most people are at lunch right now, and that's where you get a little bit of a broader view of where we are.
Nice.
Cool. So we'll go ahead and get started. Usually we wait for about 2 minutes for everybody to come in. Hi, Karl. Welcome. So one of the things that we tend to do to get started most times is kind of go around the room and introduce everybody. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Kevin Bridges. I'm the CTO at a company called DDEV. We use Kubernetes in production and focus on hosting sites so that developer to deployment kind of workflow. We are currently doing an on-site here in Denver, so having a lot of good Kubernetes conversations. Got a nice demo of some of the CI/CD process that we just went through with a product called Argo CD, which on the 18th we will have a lightning talk for. So for those of you that are interested in learning about CI/CD as it relates to the operators, controllers, and different components of Kubernetes using GitHub Actions and Argo CD, that might be a good one to attend. This is going to be a little bit more informal because there is not a lot of content in the agenda doc. So nice to meet everybody and welcome. And I guess we'll go ahead and start with the folks in the room. Derek, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Derek Lemon, software developer, cluster lifecycle developer working against COPS, one of the contributors in the COPS community. So.
Cool. Teresa?
Hey, I'm Teresa Closer. I am marketing at DDEV.
Cool. Sean?
Sean Stratton. I'm a SRE at DDEV and
Cool. Andrew?
Andrew French, software engineer at DDEV, mostly interfacing with Kubernetes to like client Go and consumer things.
Nice. Dylan?
Hey there, Dylan Clear, project manager at DDEV.
Ellie here. I'm also marketing, and I seem to talk about Kubernetes a lot, so I try to listen at least as much.
Cool. And then online, we'll start with Brad.
Hey, yeah, I'm Brad Jones. I'm also in Denver, but not at DDEV. And I'm a contractor. I do DevOps stuff, and I'm also the hosting product owner for Fruition, which is an agency here in Denver that's doing in-house hosting platform.
Tom, I believe you're up next.
Yeah, finally got them working. Tom Toogood. I'm a platform engineer at Amazee.io, based in Auckland, New Zealand. Yeah, keen to catch up today. We've had a big week, just at Drupal South last week, which we had a few Kubernetes-based sessions. So yeah.
Cool. Maybe you could give us a bit of an overview of that in a little bit.
Sure.
And Karl, could you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm a dev at Finance, one of Amazee's customers. I'm just sort of still a junior in this space, but I'm trying to soak it all in.
Great. Well, welcome to the meeting. Cool. So in order to start this, I think maybe do a bit of a roundtable discussion. The topic that I want people to think about is maybe something new or what you're currently working on inside of Kubernetes. You know, where your current challenges are, what you might be fascinated with at this particular moment. I think maybe Sean, could you kind of kick that off and talk a little bit about what you've been working on lately?
I've been working on some fun stuff using GitOps for our continuous delivery process. So basically streamlining how we take our work and deploy it to the clusters to manage our customer sites.
Cool. Have you encountered any tools or any SIGs or anything interesting in Kubernetes that's got your eye at this current time?
Tools, yes, although the tool in question is changing significantly at the moment. So we decided that we were going to go with the Argo Argo CE system to do our actual deployments. And Argo and Weaveworks Flux are kind of emerging at the moment, so it's interesting to watch what's going to happen next. Weaveworks was the primary competitor for at least the release process that we're looking at to Argo. So it's nice to watch as two products emerging, we're getting the best out of both of them. So that's kind of something that I'm keeping my eye on at least.
Cool. Cool. How about you, Derek?
I've been still focusing on cluster lifecycle, but it's been moving towards cluster API. So there's some very interesting things there, like being able to scale clusters from objects inside the cluster, which gives you access to certain metrics that might be more valuable than current cloud providers do. And then also the multi-tenancy SIG and Kubernetes, both the hierarchical namespace model, and then there's a controller, a virtual cluster model.
Cool. And did you make it out to KubeCon?
Yeah, I was at KubeCon.
Cool. And how was that?
It was good. I was focused mostly on gRPC talks and multi-tenancy. So gRPC not directly related to Kubernetes, but really good inter-process communication system for microservice architectures.
Nice. Nice. Andrew, do you have anything to add there?
About what I've been working on.
Yeah. Any new and interesting things that you've discovered in Kubernetes? I understand that you're not exactly a Kubernetes engineer, but
Not strictly. I'd say an interesting point that I guess we've been working on is, especially since like the last iteration of our platform and other projects I've worked on in the past around Kubernetes, would be the fact that our client is kind of hooked directly into Kubernetes via like custom resources themselves, instead of communicating via like a separate API layer that then is responsible for communicating with the cluster. It injects itself right into the cluster and kind of is like a first-class citizen, I guess, of all those communications.
cool. Yeah, there's a lot of different techniques for getting data into and out of Kubernetes. It's neat to see those patterns evolve over time, especially as we've gone through some of the iterations that we have. I know we started with a lot of front-facing API servers that we were using to translate, and now we're much more native. And I think that's just a general good strategy for people to kind of keep in mind. How about you, Brad? Anything new and interesting in the Cube world, or anything that you're specifically working on that's kind of interesting right now?
Yeah, I mean, I got some, good feedback from folks at DrupalCon Europe. Just got an opportunity to kind of see what people were up to, and as usual in the context of like at Fruition, we're supporting a lot of different CMSs and Drupal and WordPress and bespoke stuff, and my focus there has been trying to drive some change and modernization, but also like keep things simple for developers. So I think that's really been my focus, and something recently that we've been trying to roll out is like a uniform way to even just handle like logging, right? Because I think a lot of times we overlook logging. So rolling out internally like modules that provide a little bit of an abstraction layer for us over like monologue, so that we can basically just give developers like a Drupal 8 module, or I've got somebody working on like a WordPress plugin to just you add it, and with our base image, it prints logs to the console in a predictable format, and we're using Stackdriver to ingress that. So trying to use as much stuff off the shelf to keep it simple is sort of my focus right now. And just thinking about, I didn't get to go to KubeCon, but I heard a lot of feedback from people like there's sort of tool overload, I think, right now, where like there's all these flashy things, and there's a lot of VC money, and there's all these products with cutesy.io names. And I saw Kelsey Hightower, who I know is sort of a high-profile Kubernetes guy, on Twitter, and he's kind of constantly trying to like pull back on that, I think, a little bit, and just be like, let's just focus on like a good API and roll it out, and maybe like pump the brakes on you know, always using the next flashy thing. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's what we're trying to kind of do, is make as much of this transparent to developers as possible.
Sounds very similar to the life cycle of Drupal and other complex systems. You know, it starts off with crazy modules that are maybe not written to the quality standards of core that eventually find their way into core, to the point where you don't have to do the same type of manual toil that you were doing previously to get the same effects. And yeah, you know, really it's a question of technical debt management and what you're able to accomplish as a small team. So I think those are really valid and valuable points that you made for sure. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, we've been pretty busy. We've been at that conference, Drupal South, last week. We got a really good deep dive into Skipper, which is a project based by Previous Next, which is based in Sydney, in Australia. And yeah, it's a really cool project. It's definitely something worth checking out. It's basically a build and deployment system for Drupal and Kubernetes. You know, it takes a lot of that sort of pain around, you know, integration with Kubernetes. It's just a CLI based tool, heavily using operators, and the architecture is really nice, I believe. So they've kind of broken that up into different operators for different purposes, and we were able to actually have a really good chat about how we can collaborate going forward, which is really exciting. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens there. The other big news is that Lagoon, the project by Amazee.io, we're full steam ahead for native Kubernetes support. We've got customers coming on board with managed Kubernetes services from January. So yeah, so if you're interested in that's going on, we've got a lot of stuff up on our GitHub page, and yeah, we've already got a POC running, and we're just doing those final tests and changes to make sure we sort of drop what we've had in the past is more of a OpenShift centric approach, into something, yeah, which will be native Kube and supported by multiple managed services. So we're not targeting just the one either. Yeah.
Very cool. And for those that aren't aware, what's that GitHub repository, or what's the org?
So the org is Amazee.io and the repository is Lagoon. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Karl, I understand that you're still relatively new, so if you have anything, feel free. If you'd like to pass, feel free as well.
I was at Drupal South last week, and I've been pretty busy since, but I think Tom covered off pretty much all of it.
Cool. Well, there's definitely a lot going on in the Kubernetes world. I don't know if everybody or anybody caught it, but Ricardo posted a very interesting graphic that's kind of a summary of some of the stuff that's been happening at KubeCon. You know, some of the nice things that have been happening, specifically at the top of the list, is that Helm 3 launched. Has anybody in the group had the opportunity to use it yet? Everybody's head down trying to figure out this Kubernetes thing, so it's totally understandable. But I'm hearing good things about it. There's a lot of improvements over Helm 2. Definitely encourage people to take a look at it and share what they find out about it. It's been a pretty interesting project for a long time. Has a lot of community support, and that's always a good thing. Another announcement that ended up happening is that they had a couple of new Platinum members join. So NetApp, Palo Alto Networks, and ARM are now Platinum members of the Cloud Native Foundation. That's always a good thing to see, because essentially, you know, Kubernetes gives a lot of value to the organizations that participate in it. And the more that we see larger organizations like these continue to participate and help the community thrive, the more we come to trust the Kubernetes community and the software that's being created by it, knowing that it's vetted and that there's a good governance model in place. There's a lot of really intelligent people with a lot of edge cases and use cases that are being accounted for as a result of this investment in this work. Fidelity and Investments and Equinix are now gold members, which has been pretty nice, in the same vein of support. Rancher Labs announced a new product called Rio. I haven't had the opportunity to take a look at that, but I think it's worth checking out. JFrog has done a lot of different things in the Java space, and they're slowly moving forward to allow more and more utilization inside of Kubernetes. They've announced a JFrog container registry that has over 148,000 code commits so far, so it's definitely worth taking a look at. And I might have mixed that statistic just a little bit.
I'm just curious, does anybody know what the difference is between what's now releasing versus Artifactory?
I do not.
Yeah, I had community before.
Yeah.
So
I would imagine that they broke it out and modernized it a little bit, but that's purely hypothetical. Artifactory is a very old school workhorse that does amazing things when implemented properly. It can be a bit heavy though. There's a company out there that is named HPE. They have made an announcement that was worth mentioning at KubeCon that they have K8's all open source solutions. Not quite sure, I don't have too much background on information on that. Red Hat made an announcement that they launched a project called Code Ready Workspaces 2.0. Definitely take a look at that. And then two more announcements. Diamante announced Spectra Hybrid Cloud Solutions, and Mirantis launched Kubernetes as a service. And Mirantis launching Kubernetes as a service is particularly interesting because Mirantis, if I'm not mistaken, is the company that recently purchased the Docker Composer deployment processes from Docker. So Docker has been alleviated of that dual split focus and are focusing primarily on the local development environments that they currently work on. So curious to see what ends up happening there. It sounds like KubeCon was pretty interesting. General statistics about the event and Kubernetes in general. We're now at over 83,000 pull requests inside of the Kubernetes environment and community. Basically 1.1 million contributors have helped Kubernetes get to where it is. The statistic that I misspoke earlier was we're sitting at 148,000 code commits. I think the Code Ready Workspace has roughly 35,000 contributors in it, and then collectively, KubeCon represented over 25,000 job openings. So what we're seeing in the industry is that Kubernetes continues to accelerate. It continues to essentially dominate when it comes to the orchestration abilities for what we've all been working on. So I think it's a really exciting place to be. I like to see the growth, and I think it's a very healthy thing. And as far as that, I really don't have too much to talk about. So I think maybe open it up to the team, or to the group, and see if anyone has any recent challenges or celebrations that they'd like to share. Maybe some of the problems that you're currently facing that you might like to get a little bit of feedback on. We do have some intelligent people on the line, so feel free to contribute there. I'll just give it a second if anybody would like to jump in.
Kevin, I'm just curious if any, I don't know if I've brought this up before, but is anybody running Magento workloads?
In Cube, we're exploring it, but we haven't actually taken that plunge yet. I understand that Magento, we were at a Typo 3 conference in Germany, and I believe they had the head of something related to Magento out there. I'm not sure if it was product or development, but we did a little bit of exploration, and it sounds like it's completely possible. Magento tends to be a little bit heavier as far as disk I/O is concerned. Specifically, it does a lot of reading and writing when it's in a development mode, but it also has a production layer mode where it goes through and eliminates that disk I/O largely. So it starts to become more Cube capable. It's definitely not a stateless app, so I'd be ultra curious to hear of any success stories around that.
Well, I mean, we're out of sort of necessity running some Magento 1 and 2 workloads. Magento 1 is end of life like imminently. Magento 2 is actually much more difficult to sort of containerize for some of the reasons that you just expressed, and the fact that it's, I think, brought along a lot of interesting technical debt, I guess I'll say. I'm very much like a Drupal commerce guy instead, but I mean, we're running it because basically we've just kind of done a legacy application, you know, kind of containerization of it. It's not very cloud native, but if anybody is getting more into that space, I'd love to commiserate, I guess.
Okay.
That's definitely something we're looking for. We've just actually recently added a couple of other frameworks. So Civil Stripe's a big one. It's a New Zealand-based CMS that the government use here quite heavily. So we've been working on that support just last week. We're looking at a number of other frameworks just to provide an easy onboarding process. A lot of them you could actually just get going straight away in the way we've architected our platform. However, we're just wanting to give like an example. Here's a good starting point. Here's a good setup, and here's your services that you should provide. One of the things with Magento, I remember a couple of years back, was
quite tricky because you couldn't download the source without a user account. Is that still the case?
Well, that's sort of more of like a build time consideration. You still, if you are installing with Composer, you still need to have like a credential to authenticate against the Magento repo, although like it's free if it's community edition. Magento kind of has that same kind of problem with like, you know, it's not GPL2, so there's a lot of like paid plugins. But we just address that by like injecting, you know, the right credentials and stuff at build time. But the challenges that we've had more with Magento is that on like schema change and like code deploy, it has its own like dependency injection and like sort of pre-compilation subsystem. And all of the Magento people that we have, because I'm not one, basically like say that it's almost unavoidable to have like up to 15 and 20-minute downtimes on deploy, which I just can't believe, but nobody's come to me with any solutions there. I think it's also complicated by the fact that basically Adobe bought Magento, and their cloud product is sort of this opaque enterprise version of it, which I think like all the CE users are feeling the pain of self-hosting. So
yeah, it's something that we're definitely looking into. Mainly because we are now that we're going to go through this Kubernetes support, we're going to now look and open up and sort of provide some sort of standardized libraries for these bigger frameworks, really. So it's something we're interested in. So
we've done, I mean, I've hit some pain points and sort of pushed through them. I don't know if in the right way or not, but I'd be happy to share, you know, my experience with you guys. And, you know, the more people that are working on this, the better, because I think the Magento space is dominated by a lot of like managed providers that have no incentive to share whatever tips and tricks they just discovered along the way.
Yeah, I noticed they didn't really embrace the whole open source thing from the beginning. So yeah, it's kind of like half-assed. So yeah.
Cool. And in chat doesn't get recorded on YouTube. So Brad, can you repeat your question and maybe Tom give a little bit of insight there?
I'm sorry, what was the?
Are you asking about AWS case on Fargate?
Oh, in the chat. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I saw on Twitter people talking about, or you know, Amazon people pimping their sort of serverless pod environment there on Fargate. I'm not a big fan of the AWS control plane. I just think it's really dated and crappy. But the thought of not even having to worry about node layer kind of stuff being abstracted away seems interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, I haven't actually properly looked. It looked like it was released overnight, and we've just been asleep, so haven't dug into it. But from what I can see, it seems like it's kind of like this infinite node scaling unit type thing. So you're really not managing nodes anymore. You basically define your workloads and you define your resource limits within each pod, and you let Fargate manage how it gets sort of deployed and managed. So it's that whole, I know Azure have also been going down this path for a couple of years, which they've been working on this sort of infinity node project, which is basically a node which you add to either an AKS cluster or even an on-prem cluster that you can actually just infinitely scale with a single node, and to stop the need for having to manage sort of node pools and resources at that level. There was also something Kelsey brought up, I think, when it was announced, is the fact that, hey, you know, now we've got this fabulous API with Kubernetes. Why are we still managing nodes? I mean, we kind of can manage it at that pod level. So yeah, it's something that it's really interesting. I'm keen to test it out, and yeah, hopefully we'll have some feedback later on.
Cool. And Tom, have you had any experience with Jeff Geerling's Tower Operator? I saw that you linked that earlier, and it seems pretty interesting.
Yeah. Jeff's obviously been pretty hard at work. I noticed he's been all over that operator SDK repository, which is really cool. So I haven't directly used that operator. We use AWS quite heavily. So yeah, I mean, the idea would be we use the old way to deploy, which was a actual Ansible playbook, because it's a Red Hat product. We'll definitely look at replacing that with the operator from Jeff, because it's just a pain to maintain, really. So a simple operator, simple CRD to deploy our AWS and manage upgrades and things would be much easier.
Cool. Yeah, so just as general kind of administrative type of stuff, still working on getting a little bit more formalized about lightning talks. I think that we're going to have a good one, like I said, on the 18th, that's going to cover Argo CD and GitHub Actions and some of our deployment processes that we use internally. Those are coming along pretty well. We're learning just an amazing amount of knowledge as a result of playing with some of these. You know, back to Brad's point earlier about, I think it was Brad that made the point about all of the tools that are popping up in the community and in the ecosystem. It's really hard not to just pick the new shiny. So for us, we started off with a product called CodeFresh that we were using, and it originally started with Jenkins, for that matter. Have evolved through a couple generations of tools, and I think that we found a nice sweet spot that we're looking forward to sharing. If anybody has any lightning talks that they'd like to put together or maybe share with the group, feel free to approach me at any time. We'll get that on the schedule. I think maybe reaching out to Nick Santos, I believe it is, to get an overview of Skipper would be pretty nice, because it sounds like a neat project, and I don't know too much about it, so maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, Thomas, but is it along the lines of building your containers locally, based off of what you're working with locally, and then pushing those up to their hosted system, or how does that work exactly? Do you know?
Yeah, it'd be great to have them on board to really go through it. So hopefully I'm not going to totally mess this up. But we did do a deep dive in a BOF last week, so I do have it fresh in the mind. But yeah, the idea is that it's very heavily integrated with AWS, which actually solves a lot of those authentication and build issues. So yes, you're right. So you actually build out your project locally, and you push that up to the container registry within AWS. All your authentication is all managed via an IAM role. So it's basically shared across a project or anything like that. So you're authenticated already. You can push your images up, and then it proceeds to deploy out to EKS, and it takes advantage of a lot of those managed services. So CloudWatch for logs, CloudFront for CDN, you know, the list goes on. There's serverless RDS, Aurora for database, and all of those are little mini operators. So the idea is that you have a top level operator, which is Drupal, and a CRD and a spec, which is published on the repository. And that contains all the configuration for all the sub operators. And effectively you deploy the single CRD, which is Drupal, all the sub operators kick into gear. And the idea is that they actually do their thing and bubble up and update the spec and the status on the single Drupal CRD. So you kind of can have a single place to know exactly the state of the whole Drupal site that you're running, with linking off to all the operators. And yeah, it's a super simple, super easy to sort of manage and maintain from a user point of view. I guess at this stage it's around that configurability, so extending it to do different things. They talked about, rather than just using Aurora serverless, to have, you know, your normal dedicated stack if you for various things like scaling and whatnot. But the model I've got there is really nice. So that the operator model, a single top level operator, and then all these sub operators that can combine and give you your desired result, essentially. So it's all built with KubeBuilder, so all Go based. And what we've discussed is the fact that because of they're all kind of very integrated into a single operator and repository, we're really trying to possibly get to move some of that out, because these are really generic tooling type things that we can actually share. So one example was actually having development container images. So what they have a concept of, every night they go and snapshot the database, sanitize it, push that into a database image, and then release that. And so developers actually every day just pulling down the latest image of the database, which contains all the data. There's no SQL syncing or anything going on. All access again is controlled via your normal project access. All the sanitization's done for you. So they've got a really cool tool called MTK.
Yeah.
Yep, which sort of does this all for you. And that's actually now an operator within Skipper. So you can basically send a CRD of an image with all the information that you need to do with the sanitization instructions, and it goes ahead and creates that sanitized database image and pops it somewhere. So that's something we actually use at CMS. We built something custom for that purpose. However, really keen to sort of collaborate on that sort of stuff, because it just seems like it's a great solution to that problem, and it might as well be a generic one, which is really cool.
Excellent. It sounds like an exciting product. It sounds like they're doing some very unique and interesting things there.
Sure are. Yeah. It's all bleeding edge, and you know, I think they've made the right decision around, you know, managed services, leverage as much of that as possible, keeping that really core as small as possible, and then only they'll look at, you know, extending to managing some of that stuff inside the project only at on needs basis, basically. So yeah, it's exciting, and I recommend everyone just keep an eye out, and hopefully they can actually come on and do that explanation justice.
Yeah.
So,
I think it makes a lot of sense to reach out to Nick and see if we can't get him to come on and talk about it a little bit.
Yep. Yeah.
Cool. Well, you know, it's a small group, so I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter than normal until we get some of these lightning talks lined up. So thank everybody for participating. We have one more meeting this year that's going to happen on December 18th. I think I've mentioned that a couple times. And then the meeting after that on January 1st is going to be canceled because of New Year's. So thank you for your participation. Have a great end of the year, and looking forward to seeing everybody online.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep, thank you.
That's it. Yeah.